As January arrives, with questions, with lists, with pressure to become someone new, to consider what you'll fix, it's easy to forget the strengths that already exist. You're starting from a body that learned how to survive, from a nervous system that adapted, from a self that has been showing up in ways that don't always get counted. So before we talk about consistency or discipline or change, let's pause and ask a different question. Not what's wrong with me, but what have I been carrying that's kept me from connecting to who I already am? Because when you stop carrying for everyone else, you might finally see her, that woman you want to become. The one who feels happy and confident, at home in her body, the one who glows. She isn't missing. She isn't waiting somewhere in the future. She is here. Welcome to the episode. So, January has a way of quietly turning the volume up on self criticism for a lot of people. Suddenly, you're looking back over the year, looking forward to a new start, like the next year, and noticing all the places you think you should have been more consistent, more disciplined, or organized, or motivated, more on it. And for a lot of women, and maybe for you too, January often brings up that familiar question of what's wrong with me? Why can't I stick to things? What can I do better? Previously, I spoke about remembering who you were before you were taught to be less. And today, I want to bring that into the place that January tends to hook so many of us. This idea that you need to work out how to become a new you know, that new year, new you sort of vibe. So I hope this episode, well, it invites you to explore that question with curiosity rather than criticism. So, not as a motivational pep talk or a list of positive affirmations or another list of habits that you should do better at, but as something that's more curious and honest, to be honest, more truthful. Because what if this year isn't about becoming more consistent? As in doing more, achieving more, trying harder, or reinventing yourself. What if this year is about practicing more often, remembering and reconnecting with who you already are? Because in our culture, that culture that rewards achievement and performance and striving to do more all the time, most of us have been taught to think about consistency in a really narrow way, usually in terms of habits, routines, productivity, and achievement, like going to the gym, 5 times a week, or meditating every morning, meal prepping, keeping on top of everything, sticking to a plan. And then when we don't manage it, it can quickly turn into that story of it being something about us. Like, I'm so inconsistent. Why can't I just stick to things? I'm just not motivated enough. I'm just not trying harder. I've not got enough willpower. All those things. And those messages are rarely neutral because they feed into this all or nothing idea. If you can't do something consistently, you've failed. And if you've failed, you're not good enough. And if you're not good enough, something must be wrong with you. But that spiral isn't a character flaw, even though it feels like it is. It's often a shame response. It's that familiar hijack where the question, what's happening here, what's going on, turns into what is wrong with me. And when shame is in the room, a part of us, like a protective part of us, usually shows up to try and protect us from feeling that shame. So sometimes it might look like procrastination, it might look like not trying, it might look like, oh, what's the point? I can never maintain it. And that's because this part of you that wants to protect you from that feeling is like, well, if you don't try, you can't fail. And if you don't fail, you don't have to feel that old sting of not being enough. So, if January tends to leave you feeling heavy or pressured or frozen or just like behind or overwhelmed, I just want to say it makes complete sense. And I know this personally as well because for years I approached New Year's resolutions from a place of like personal deficit, fix myself somehow in certain areas. With the new notebook, which I've mentioned previously, my love for notebooks that don't get completed, or a new planner, like trying to become this new version of me. And because I am very all or nothing, my lists were always pretty intense, to be fair. Like my goals were. And yeah, I couldn't just have one. It'd be like, like I've said, 5 gym sessions a week and daily meditation or mindfulness, 2 liters of water a day, eating good, getting on top of everything. And I approached it all very logically, very structured. Like, if I did it properly, I'd finally become that version of me that felt good enough and like that best version of me. But what I obviously wasn't factoring in was capacity, which a lot of us don't consider, and factors outside my control, like life being uncertain as it is, curveballs being thrown at us all the time, emotional load, illness, changes in routine or circumstance, things outside my control, other people, um, tiredness, the fact that pushing harder doesn't actually create more safety or steadiness. And then every time I wasn't on it, it wasn't motivating. I didn't motivate myself. Like there wasn't an internal motivation then to get back on it. It was shaming, like I'd failed again. It just fed into that shame spiral. But I know now that I wasn't failing at, discipline. It wasn't a thing of not having enough willpower. I was trying to become someone new instead of listening to who I already was. And that's what I want for you this January is not pressure or reinvention or another way to feel not enough, but a different starting point. And when we frame consistency in the way that these cultural narratives shape it and in the way these mainstream sort of messages filter through to us, what often gets missed is the fact that so many of us, so many people aren't inconsistent at all. They're actually really consistent, just not in ways that get praised or objectively measured, not in ways that get turned into gold stars and before and after reels. For example, you might be consistent at showing up for other people. You might be consistent at caring and being understanding or feeling empathy. You might be consistent at adapting, at holding things together for other people. You might be consistent at staying calm and reasonable and emotionally available even when you're exhausted. And I wonder if you can feel that land for a moment because you may have been so trained to measure your worth by productivity and achievement that you wouldn't even have considered those things as evidence of your consistency. You might call it, being normal. It's just normal. It's what you should do anyway. Or you're just getting on with it. Or, and this is really common, you might minimize it as, well, it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. And it's worth naming because you may not have recognized how you are consistent in those areas and how those areas demonstrate lovely and kind qualities and values you hold. And the flip side is, unfortunately, that this kind of consistency can also come at a cost because it's the kind of consistency that isn't always kind to you. We need to acknowledge that sometimes what gets praised as consistency is actually rigidity. And sometimes that rigidity comes from a learned survival strategy, not necessarily a grounded choice. And this is why I say it's like so helpful to get curious about stuff, about the labels we attach to ourselves and about the function of what we do and don't do and the things that we might not see when we first look at them through a particular lens of certain beliefs or narratives that have been sort of passed down to us or that exist within the systems that we navigate every day of our lives. So here are some everyday examples of things that you might be consistent with. You might reply to messages straight away because the idea of leaving someone hanging makes you feel anxious, even if you're shattered and you just want to eat your tea while it's hot. You might rewrite a simple text 5 times to make sure it doesn't sound rude or blunt or needy or dramatic, so they don't take it the wrong way from how it's intended. You consistently offer to do extra work to help those who are struggling, even though your to-do list is building up and you've been catching up on work at the weekend. Maybe you often or consistently say yes automatically without checking if you have time, without checking in with whether or not you actually want to do it, or even if you have capacity to do it. Maybe you are consistently the one to soften and reword and rephrase and soften what you're saying to people so no one else gets defensive or triggered. And then when they still react defensively, you consistently focus on analysing what you said wrong. And that's not you being bad. at consistency in terms of focusing it on the wrong things. That's you being consistent at doing what you feel you need to in order to stay safe. Because somewhere along the way, you, like many women, may have learned either in your childhood or throughout certain periods of your life or due to the response of others currently in your life. If I'm easy to be around, I'm less likely to be rejected. If I'm helpful, I'm less likely to be criticised. If I'm calm, I'm less likely to be punished. If I adapt, I'm more likely to keep connection. If I take on responsibility for their reactions, we are less likely to fall out. So you may have become consistent at keeping going even when your body is asking you to rest, or giving to others even when you're depleted, being the steady one even when no one is steady for you, managing the emotional temperature in the room, anticipating and preventing upset before it even happens. And then when January arrives and that cultural script says, right, now add more onto that, more routines, more self care, more habits, more self improvement, more consistency. And if your system is already stretched thin, because I imagine it will be if you can relate to what I've said so far, then no wonder it feels impossible. If you've been giving a lot to other people consistently, or compensating for other people's needs or moods or disorganization, or compensating for their inconsistency in those areas, it makes complete sense that you may not have much emotional, cognitive, or physical capacity left for new routines or habits that you want to form. And that's not about laziness or a lack of discipline or that you're just not wanting it enough, as some cultural narratives try to tell us. That's about capacity. And capacity is shaped by so much like sleep, stress, mental load, hormones, sensory overload, burnout. And a big one is emotional labour and feeling unsafe and adapting oneself for others and life actually happening. And, they're the things that impact all of those other things. So if you're sitting there thinking, why can't I just stick to resolutions or do things I want to do? See if you can get curious and ask, what is already being asked of me and by whom? What am I already carrying that might not be mine to carry? Where is my energy already going? Not just physically or practically, but mentally and emotionally. Because for so many women, energy is already going outwards in ways that don't get named, into managing relationships, anticipating other people's moods, smoothing things over after awkward moments, analysing and researching the behaviour of others, justifying, explaining themselves, or working out how best to say things, holding off, waiting for the right time for the other person, suppressing how you really feel, making yourself easier for the other person. And even me saying this, it's like I'm feeling tired just like describing it all. But so much going on there. You might be the one who remembers the birthdays or the events that you've got to attend in your relationship. You might be the one who checks in with others all the time consistently, or you're the one who follows up and makes plans happen. You're the one who feels bad for the fact someone feels bad for making you feel bad. Or you're the one who keeps your connection alive. Or the one that smooths things over despite knowing you've done nothing wrong. You're the one who's adjusting and softens your tone so someone else doesn't get defensive or, having to feel like you have to second guess or justify or explain reasonable requests. You're the one that reflects on your own behaviour and thoughts and feelings based on how someone else responds, so you can double check if you are acting in proportion to the situation. Maybe you're consistently considering how other people might take what you say and the one doing the emotional admin of your relationship. So the question isn't always, why can't I do more? What's wrong with me? Sometimes the most honest question is, where is my energy already going? And is it going there by grounded choice? So a question I really, really, really would love you to consider this time of year is, where have I already been consistent? And who or what have I been compensating for? And that might land straight away in you. Or you might notice like a blankness or resistance or emotion, or you might notice that you start thinking about it, but then other part within you, like another voice comes into you to sort of make you doubt yourself about it or tell you that it's not that bad, or whatever it is, but just notice it. Because when we can let that question breathe, we can often start noticing things that maybe we've never really counted before or noticed, like the emotional labour or the patience that comes with all this, or the constant adjusting and effort, the lack of responsibility held by others, or the responsibility you've quietly taken on or been given by how people behave or don't behave, whether it's at work, in friendships, in family, in relationships. And when that effort goes unseen, even by you, it's very easy for frustration to turn inward. And isn't that interesting? How quickly you can get frustrated with yourself rather than getting curious about what or who might be prompting the exhaustion in the first place. And just to say right now, there's a whole other conversation here about anger and how anger often gets turned inward for women before we are able to see where the anger is telling us to look. But I'll save that because it deserves its own episode. But this is about January culture that says and asks, what more should you do? But for some people, the more supportive question is, what might I need to do less of? What might someone else need to be doing more of? Should I be doing less explaining or less managing others and their emotions and less justifying, less trying to find the solution for someone who's not able or willing to acknowledge their problem? Less over functioning or less prompting, less taking responsibility for someone else's growth, and less pushing through when your body is asking for a pause. And I want to hold on to the nuance here because this isn't a do less like as a blanket rule. This is the whole thing. It's not about rigidity within this, and it's not about simplifying stuff or a black and white thing. It's not about avoiding accountability. It's not about lowering our standards or staying in dynamics that hurt. It's about recognizing that sometimes doing more has been part of a pattern that keeps you stuck and maintains a pattern of others doing less. Because if you're always pouring outward, you'll always feel like you don't have it in you to be consistent with the things that maybe you do want to do and that maybe you do need for yourself. And as I say, it's not about becoming someone new, as the cultural narratives often suggest. It's about remembering parts of you that have always been there, but have got buried under all of this stuff, under the pressure, under the rules and survival strategies. Your curiosity, which may have been externally directed towards trying to understand others and why they do what they do or don't do, rather than curiosity about yourself. Your creativity, which may have been lost beneath the voice within you that tells you not to be silly or that you're not good enough. Your values that may have been overridden along the way or got confused with the values of others. And your deep capacity for care, which may have become focused on others over yourself. It's about sort of acknowledging and getting curious about the fact that sometimes those qualities within you have been exploited, or maybe sometimes you've overextended them, or maybe sometimes you've used them to keep yourself feeling safe and okay in relationships, or, to keep a relationship going or to maintain your role within a certain group. But the point here isn't, be softer, be kinder. You're already doing that. The point is considering and remembering all these qualities you have and getting curious and asking yourself, can you offer some of that steadiness you consistently offer others back to yourself? And when we talk about sort of remembering qualities and things like that, sometimes remembering also looks like reconnecting with what brings you joy, what you love to do for you, or what you once did. And if you don't remember what you loved as a child, it doesn't have to be about that. That's okay. For many people, those parts were shaped or shamed or sidelined early on. So remembering doesn't have to mean, digging something up from the past. It can simply mean noticing right now, in the present, noticing what feels nourishing, what feels draining as well, what feels like heavy, and what feels a little lighter. What makes you exhale without realizing you are holding your breath? That is remembering and reconnecting. So if you are someone who recognizes things like people pleasing or overgiving in yourself and relationships, here's something to sit with as you think about goals or intentions. Am I drawn to this because it feels meaningful and important to me? Or because it feels like something I should do to be better or easier or good enough or more acceptable to other people? And again, here's the nuance. Sometimes there are things you want to change. Sometimes there are patterns you need to work on. But working on something from shame and criticism feels so different to working on something from self connection and curiosity. Shame based change tends to sound like sort yourself out, get disciplined, stop being like this, you're not trying hard enough. Whereas self connected change tends to sound like, what do I actually need? What would support me in this? What's realistic for my capacity? What would I say to a friend? What might expand my capacity? What matters to me? Not what looks impressive or not what other people have told me should matter. If I waved a magic wand and I didn't have any criticism or self doubt within me, everybody was always happy about the choices I made, what would you choose to be doing in terms of what you want or need or enjoy? Because when we look at shame based change, that voice within the shame usually leads to shutdown or burnout because it makes us go, 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 go until we can't, or resentment because it feeds into us neglecting what we need or want. Whereas, self connected change is steadier, more sustainable, more you. So I know I've sort of got you. Maybe I've been offering a few too many, I don't know, questions to ask yourself and to look at. But I'm just going to offer you a more, like a further reflection, if you like, that you can do after this episode, even maybe on, the notes on your phone or even in your head while you make a brew or something. It's not about judging whether your consistency has been good or bad. It's about noticing patterns, what they've given you, and what they've cost you. So you might write this down. This year, I've been consistent at, and notice this without ranking it as good or bad. So it might include like survival based consistency or unhealthy patterns in relationships, maybe. It might include like very sort of growth, achievement based consistency. And that's not saying you can't ever strive for achievement, by the way. This is just to rebalance, the narrative that we're often taught. So, for example, you might notice that you've resonated with some of the stuff in this episode and you've noticed that you've been consistent at being the one who checks in, who's always sort of smoothing things over in the relationship, prompting the discussions that are needed or not, or biting your tongue and suppressing your emotions to try and keep the peace. You might notice that you are the one that's consistently making more effort than others. Or maybe you have noticed that you've been saying no more often to certain things. Maybe you've been choosing rest when you can. Maybe you have been speaking up when something doesn't feel right. Or you've been sort of more assertive at times. Maybe you have been pulling back from dynamics that cost you or getting more curious about them to protect your energy. So the next bit is once you've sort of maybe made a note or identified how you are consistent, i.e., like what areas you're consistent in, you're going to look at what it's cost you. And you might also notice what it's given you. So maybe consider, what it's protected you from, like pros, cons, what it's cost you, what it's taken up, perhaps what it's changed. And it might be positives and negatives. So for some people, they might notice changes around time, energy, rest, safety, stability, distance from conflict, or a sense of self-respect, or a sense of exhaustion, or questions about a relationship. It might feel like a bad thing, some of these things. Some of them might actually be a good thing, but they don't feel so good because, like I say, maybe a dynamic's changed because of it. Okay, so for the next one, just note down, this year I want to practice being consistent with, and then maybe you could start noting some stuff down. And this isn't to come from a place where, like, it's not about perfection, it's not about performance, but think about consistency that's aligned with your values that you may have just been relating to and your capacity as well. And I want it to be framed as gentle experiments, not rules. So you could practice consistency with yourself. And that might look like, pausing before you say yes, or checking in with how your body's feeling at times, getting curious and getting to know and reconnect with you and what you're feeling. instead of overriding it straight away with logic or guilt. Allowing rest to be preventative, not something you earn once you've done enough. I know it's easier said than done. Maybe there's something about staying connected to yourself in conversations, like trying to observe what's going on for you. Maybe you could practice not translating your needs into 10 different versions that will hopefully make them easier for someone to hear, and noticing it may not be a lack of explaining that's the problem. Getting curious instead about what makes it feel necessary to keep rephrasing or softening, managing the other person's response to you. Maybe noticing the urge to rescue and pausing and seeing if you can hold back just a little, allowing space for the other person to notice, respond, and take responsibility when it's appropriate and safe to do so. It might be about doing less, but with more intention. And that might look like not reminding someone again to do the thing that they said they'd do. Letting someone else take the lead, even if it feels unsettling or uncertain. Asking friends to plan the catch up sometimes. Maybe speaking or expressing more about how you're feeling if it feels safe. Allowing stuff to be imperfect. And I want to say none of this is about becoming less caring or of others or, more harsh or harder. It's just about what you are carrying and what you can carry and what you should or shouldn't be carrying. What was never yours to carry in the first place. And if you want one final question to hold, ask yourself this: who or what am I compensating for? And what would it feel like to step back just slightly? I hope that's been helpful. I know there's quite a few more reflective questions than I was intending, but I hope they've been helpful. And as it's probably going to become a regular thing, I'm going to leave you with a few spoken words to just help this sink in and summarise the episode, if you like. So before you decide what needs fixing this year, pause. Let the noise fall quiet, let the urgency clear, ask what you've already been carrying. The unseen effort, the weight you wear daily, the ways you kept going without ever naming it bravery. Ask whether all that responsibility was ever meant to be yours to hold, whether you learned to carry it because that's what you were told. Because you're not starting from nothing, you're starting from tried, from a life that has asked a lot and a heart that replied. And maybe remembering that is a steadier place to begin than tearing yourself down to build someone new again. She is here, not later, not when you've proven or tried, and this year, maybe you don't need a new you somehow. Maybe you just need more of you. And maybe she is here now.